Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in, and some of you would have seen that I've put up the topic for today, and I'm really looking forward to sharing some of the stories about the role of nature, both for women in recovery from domestic violence and also just as an everyday practice in life. So as always, the Big Girls on the Move crowdfunding campaign is what we're all about, to place 20 boxes of the Big Girls Little Colouring Book into 20 domestic violence services. Thank you very much to the campaign contributors this week. We're just about complete on box number 6, which will go to the Ninko Aboriginal Women's Homeless Service, number 5 to Catherine House Homeless Women's Service. We've had quite a few things going on with the launch of the other colouring book in the last week, so it will be next week that we'll be delivering the books to Catherine House. So the theme is nature. It's dear to my heart. You can see I have plants around me. My house is full of plants. As much as possible, the windows are open. We have natural light because living in the world that we're living in is becoming more and more concrete and more driven by invisible internet waves, microwaves, mobile phone waves. So just closing on our campaign, the symbol that we use for our campaign, as you can see, is a box of the colouring books. That's actually what the box looks like. 36 boxes to books to a box, sorry. And the wings really symbolise the boxes moving into the different services. So I forgot to put that one up when I was talking. So we're really talking today about the role of nature. I'd like to share a little bit about my garden story, but I'll be sharing that in more detail in an upcoming video from the photos that I took the day I moved in to the day I left. But at that time of my life, I left. I've had a difficult challenge in earlier years, naming it as domestic violence. The circumstances were my partner's mental illness, and for many women, finding a place where to sort through mental illness, domestic violence, would that have happened if the person didn't have a mental illness. But what happened for me was I had to leave that relationship and that home. For a period of time I was homeless, and I was able to secure state emergency housing. And it was paradoxical because I was working in this sector at the time. It was a very humbling experience. Anyway, this is the place I came to, was this garden here, this paddock actually. I made the decision at the time that I would use that garden as my canvas. And as I said, I will be sharing some stories of that, of the process over those years, the different trees I planted and why. 6 years later, that was my garden. So it would be fair to say I spent a great deal of time working, weeping, weeding and seeding. To be quite honest, that was really what that journey was about. But you can see that with focus, I was very fortunate that I received housing that had garden space. Not everybody is that fortunate. And I'd also say some of the women I work with in shelters don't want a garden space because it is extra work. But I was, I had the time and I had the vision to create that garden. So talking about nature and the role of nature for healing is very personal for me. I do believe that that garden was my source of healing. I had something to focus on. I had somewhere for the energy to go when I was digging the soil, watering. And at that time, I was working in the shelter. I also created a colouring page for the women. And this was many years before the colouring book trend sort of reached a global phenomena. I had recognised, along with my teammates, that for the women in the domestic violence shelter to have something to do with her hands was a really powerful way for her to slow down the mind. So I created the Healing Power of Nature mandala for us to have a conversation in the shelter around the role of nature, because in a secure environment where there's high fences and security cameras and women are at risk, unless the shelter has some nature in the ground, it's very hard to connect with nature. So, so that was my Siri came on. As time went on and I built the garden, I developed a little workshop, and it was called Imagine If Your Garden is in the Great Outdoors. So I'll just go back to this photo, and in that top right hand corner, about maybe just a little over 3 years, maybe nearly 4 years after that photo, I had planted trees along the back row and created this space. So that was the fire circle corner. And I often used to sit out there to prepare workshops or to do writing, and I began to think about the role of nature in the system that I was both working in as a domestic violence worker, but also in the larger system where so many of us every day are going into concrete settings with sealed windows, sealed doors, recycled air. But what would it be like if we were to be able to connect with nature? So in the shelter environment, as I mentioned, it's a very secure environment, but often in our everyday life, our houses are secured, we're locking our windows and locking our doors, and eventually it just becomes a way of life. Certainly the security factor, you know, they're doing the house check before we go to sleep, locking the door. Many women, myself included, will drive with the car doors locked because that's just a security thing in an unpredictable world. And around about 2010, so it's a few years ago now, I heard a program on Radio National, on I think it was Life Matters, one of my favourite programs and favourite radio stations. And it was a term I hadn't heard before, and it was called nature deficit disorder. And I thought, oh, that sounds a bit, a bit obscure. The term was discovered or created by Richard Louv, I think is the pronunciation is, in his book Last Child in the Woods. And what he had brought forward and done the research around was how children are no longer free-ranging in nature. Many of my baby boomer friends, and certainly some who are in my social network from when we were kids, will remember long days down at the creek, come home when the lights are on. When the street lights come on, all the kids sort of return to their home after free-ranging across the suburbs. We had a local creek. My husband and business partner, David, fondly remembers life on the farm with the creek, the river, riding bikes, and there was really a sense of outdoor connection and interaction with nature, feeling the cold, feeling the wet, getting caught in the rain. So we're very engaged with nature, and obviously we are here in Australia, we're in Aboriginal country, so traditional Aboriginal culture is all based deeply interconnectedly with the landscape, Mother Nature, seasons and cycles. So I was really interested to hear this nature deficit syndrome. As I thought about my years working in 9 to 5 settings, the trajectory of getting in the car, going to work, very rhythmic, very pattern oriented inside the car, air conditioning in the summer, heating in the winter, going into the workspace. So at that time when I was building the garden, I had never been a gardener before. I really started to understand how just being out in nature can restore energy, and creating, I say co-creating with nature, learning how to plant a garden One of the things I learned is don't plant 4 big gum trees together because they grow quickly. Then they all sort of merge, and at that time then I got a knock on the door one day from the airport authority, because the airport was at the bottom of the street, and they came and lopped the top off the trees because it was affecting the radar. So that's how quickly my garden grew, because I was focusing on that and I was watering it. So the nature deficit syndrome was particularly focusing on children in nature, and how if children are not exploring nature and engaging with it, they don't develop a relationship with it. And this generation of children are the next generation of custodians of nature. They'll be making the decisions about the environment. So how important it is for children to experience and explore and connect with nature. We know that nature is being eroded as population grows. So I just want to talk about a few of the ways that we brought nature into the shelter. One was by having lots of pot plants. We would often have staff from other agencies or a government department representative come in and say, this place doesn't feel like a shelter. And I think what they were probably saying was that it felt homely and it felt cosy. And we had a lot of plants. Our furniture was wooden, not grey and steel. So we created a very homely environment where we brought nature indoors. When I shared the story of the garden with some of the women in our recent COLD, Culturally and Linguistically Diverse Women's Group, a couple of the women said seeing those images made them think about the gardens they'd left behind in the countries that they had left. And I was thrilled when one of the women wanted to show us a garden she'd made from styrofoam boxes, putting the soil in there. She only had a little unit, she had no garden, but she created that. She brought her coriander and basil were her 2 favourite herbs. So over the years, connecting with nature, hosting groups in nature has been a real passion of mine. This photo here, we've gone to a picnic at Ingallala Falls. Auntie Irene, who's not in the photo there, led us with a small drumming circle. We had a visualization. We brought our intention. We brought a picnic. We sat and shared food and stories. This photo is particularly precious to me because that's my mother on the left, who passed away in 2015, and Vicky on the right, who passed away the same week. So I really honour those 2 magnificent warrior women in sharing this photo. We spent a lot of time colouring and creating together. So that's a way to spend time in nature with friends. But also, you can just get the big girl's little colouring book, pack a picnic, sharpen the pencils. This photo was taken just in the park up the road. I work from home, so sometimes the home space, the creative space, the meeting space all merges into one. So I just spend time outside in nature. I think we should all have a thermos and a little picnic pack that we can pack and just go outside. So nature deficit disorder, and I'll put in the comments, I'll be placing the link to this reference that I'm going to share. It's from the Nature Mums website in the UK, and this is 7 signs you might be suffering from nature deficit disorder. So the theory is that there are symptoms people experience when they become disconnected from nature. And if ever you've sort of been feeling low and low on energy, and then you go outside, or you just take a trip to the beach, or you spend time at a park, often you feel that sense of elevation, just a sense of lightness of being. As always, when talking about depression or mental illness, this is not a medical prescription. Always we should be working with our medical support, with doctors on our care plan. But this is one of the tools that we can use to just find a different feeling by going outside in nature, finding a local park, going to the beach. When this video is finished, I'm going to the beach today and just put my feet in the water. So indicators that may be nature deficit disorder is at play is depression or low mood. Concentration is poor. Now, I can very much relate to that one. I went in to do a presentation into a workspace a few years ago, and the team were in a room and they'd been watching a video, and they were going to have a break and then come back, and I was going to do a short presentation about my Art of Change program. I walked into the room and the air, because it was a sealed room, there was no windows, the computer had been on, there was 20 women in the room, the air had become, wasn't circulating. And when I opened the door, everyone, it was like they were in a slightly altered state. And I knew this was not a good environment to be presenting my program, which is about creativity and things that are a bit outside of the box. So I really invited people to take a slightly longer break, stretch, drink water, go outside, and just re-energise the room a bit. So if ever you're finding you've got low concentration, you've been looking at the screen for a few hours and it's cold and the windows have been closed and you've had the electrical air heating up the room, just stepping outside and taking a breath of fresh air can be really useful. A sense of wonder. We know children are in a constant state of wonder and possibility. And often we can find that we just get set into a pattern and a rhythm, thinking about the next public holiday long weekend that might be 2 months away. And our sense of wonder and excitement and possibility has kind of like gone stale. So spending time in nature can help to inspire and reinvigorate us. Number 4 symptom of nature deficit disorder could be that you're just not feeling as creative as you used to be. This often happens in work teams, where rhythms and patterns, routines, KPIs, forms that need to be filled, a whole load of systems that are in place that don't inspire creativity. So finding a place maybe to eat lunch outside of the workspace, somewhere where there's trees or plants or somewhere where there's fresh air can be really useful. And you're developing myopia. This was an interesting one. So you can't see things far away. And what that is saying is that many of us are having short vision because we're looking at the screen directly in front of us, looking closely at things with applied concentration, and those waves coming off the computer and the mobile phones are actually affecting people's sight. So in the pre-digital era, often we were looking to the horizon and looking, going somewhere with no phone, no attachments, and moving towards something. Whereas now a lot of what we do is immediately in front of us. Your senses aren't what they used to be. So one of the signs of the nature deficit disorder is that our senses become dulled. And I won't go into all the details because I will put the link there. And number 7, which is very common, I find, particularly in that conversation about imagine if your office is in the great outdoors, is that people feel disconnected from nature. At the slightest cold breeze, it's rugging up, turning up the air conditioning. We live in a street where a couple of the houses have their air conditioner heater on 24/7. So it's always the same atmosphere, same environment. So there's no experience of nature. It's a very kind of disconnected setting. So that was a bit of a summary. I know that was a lot of fast talking about how we can engage with nature. That's just a very small piece of the garden. I planted these sunflowers there to represent the vision for my colouring book, just as I was getting a publisher, the Big Girls Little Colouring Book. And I watered that garden thinking about what it is that I wanted to create, in the same way that I watered my previous garden that was literally just a paddock. I don't know that the word paddock is as common in America as it is in Australia, because I do remember saying to an American friend once about the paddock, and she said, I've never heard of that. So I think it's pasture. So I'm just going to check now to see how our comments. Thank you, Barbara Marie Grant, my Facebook friend of long standing, for your comment there. That I'm not quite sure which part of the video that came in, but probably one of the nature moments. And I think that's all for the comments. So I'd just like to summarise by saying that I have the most enormous respect for Mother Nature, Mother Earth. She's feeling the pressure, and even if we are living in an apartment block in the city, if we have a little balcony or if we have a spot by our front door, we can plant something. As I mentioned about the group participant who had no garden at all, and she's planted her basil and coriander in boxes. I planted some sunflowers on January the 2nd, and for the last week the bees have been coming in. That's how quickly, so it's like not quite 12 weeks later. They are now a part of nature. I do recommend having a look at the website that I put up about the nature deficit disorder. And one of the questions that I'm asked is it safe for women who've experienced domestic violence, who are living in a safe house, to go out in nature? And my response to that is, for some women, it is safe if she feels safe. For some women, it's not safe. So I won't go at length into this conversation, but for some women, the danger is higher when she has left, because in reclaiming her power, often his need for control and power is accelerated. So she's not safe to go out and take a stroll, and particularly if he has made threats. But we can bring nature into our environment. If you work in an office, have a look around. Have you got plants in there to help to balance out some of that electrical air? Do you have plants in your house? Do you have a favourite spot where you can just go and spend some time and reconnect with the natural world? So I'd, in closing, thank you for listening, and please do remember our campaign. The link to the campaign is on the comments there. If you have any questions, or if you'd like to share your thoughts about the role that nature plays in your life, I'd love to hear from you. I'll see you again on Tuesday at 11 o'clock a.m. South Australian time. So in the meantime, have a very peaceful, natural weekend. Bye.